Ptolemy's astronomical and cosmological views are quite well known even today. We know far less of his work in astrology. There, as well as in astronomy, Ptolemy was a systemizer rather than an inventor. His work could be compared with that of Vettius Valens, but was far more comprehensive and gained more fame and prestige. Characteristically of this period, the text does not include references. Therefore, it is impossible to distinguish between the summary of previous studies and the author's own contribution. In Tetrabiblos, Ptolemy also attempts to maintain the scientific approach, trying to avoid lapses into mysticism. In the first book of Tetrabiblos, he observes astrology from the technical aspect, dividing it into universal astrology, astrogeography, and personal astrology, medical or horoscopic astrology. The second book deals with universal astrology, the third and fourth book with personal astrology. The two last books are divided in three parts, discussing A. the birth omens, B. the moment of birth, and C. what happens after birth. Ancient astrology has always been and still is the moral pillar of various pseudosciences. Astrology is the key to understanding the nature of pseudosciences, either for purposes of criticism or for seeking traces of rationality in them. The analysis of pseudosciences enables us to study human thought. Sometimes it would be practical to disregard the stereotype that scientific reasoning is the only way to acquire trustworthy information. More efficient definition of scientific conviction would provide new approaches in the critique of pseudosciences, and would enable the criticism of scientific ideologists for their vague evasion of pseudosciences, which paradoxically may lead to pseudoscientific tendencies in practical science. A closer look at the subject somewhat unexpectedly reveals that compared to other ancient practices, ancient astrology complies more closely with modern scientific requirements. Some important paradigms may in fact prove to originate in astrology. We should not condone the practice of separating the history of astronomy and the history of astrology, as it is not in accordance with the principle of scientific objectivity nor the convictions of the authors, as both Lynn Thorndike and Paul Feyerabend have warned. It appears that if we also took ancient astrology in consideration, the history of astronomy and of science in general would raise fewer question marks. The history of astronomy does not need to be revised, and the lack of censorship will certainly not deprive it of its scientific dignity.
Need to have the ability to control their affairs concerning territory, population, authority, and recognition. As a country, the people should be able to decide security along our borders, and formal recognition of our sovereignty by other states and countries should be established, and that sovereignty should be domestic, not churches, political organizations, or any other external agent. We the people of the United States need legitimacy and recognition as the sole sovereignty union. The government should acquire the consent of its governed, respecting the separation of church and state, religious tolerance of all people, and freedom of speech. The inalienable and indivisible sovereignty of the whole decides what is good. Enforcement of the law should not be a restriction of the individual's freedom, but a limitation to how that freedom is expressed. We must not allow the factions of this nation, which are divided, the ability to rear up the fabric of the former kind to protect and covet the actions they pursue. Free will cannot be transmitted, and is general, inalienable and indivisible, infallible, and always right. Determined and limits power by the common interest. The general will is always right and good, but its judgment isn't always enlightening. requiring legislation and law. The people, though, are the ones to decide what laws to make and impose upon themselves. The growth of the state requires the growth of sovereignty as well. In giving more power, authority, and force to the government to contain the people, the same force must be given to the sovereignty to contain the government. Remembering that sovereignty is of the collective being, and one man's order is not law. Sovereignty is the people's unbiased means to ascertain the general will, and there is no law without sovereignty. Through free election and trade, freedom of speech, religion, and private property, true liberalism, equality, and liberty is formed. Replacing monarchy and traditional conservatism with contractual theory, consisting of democracy, sovereignty, and ruled by law. Confusions of the welfare state and liberalism must end. Liberalism is limited government and individual rights, and it is not a part of the New Deal program that is being implemented in the United States today. No government has the right to violate an individual's life, liberty, or property, because these are the natural rights of every individual. Rights that are given through social compact and implemented in our Constitution and Declaration of Independence. Sovereignty is achieved through the contract, covenant, and oaths, free of subjection by any government, based on the idea that people can exist as a distinct legal entity, consenting explicitly or tacitly to surrender certain freedoms, thereby submitting to the sovereignty and law of the land for which they live. In exchange, the rights they still possess are protected, bound only by their own conscience and personal power. Giving up natural personal freedoms in exchange for political order.
Clinical holistic medicine has its roots in the medicine and tradition of Hippocrates. Modern epidemiological research in quality of life, the emerging science of complementary and alternative medicine, the tradition of psychodynamic therapy, and the tradition of bodywork are merging into a new scientific way of treating patients. Millennia ago, around 300 BCE, at the island of Kos in Old Greece, the students of the famous physician Hippocrates worked to help their patients to step into character, get direction in life, and use their human talents for the benefit of their surrounding world. For all that we know, this approach was extremely efficient medicine that helped the patients to recover health, quality of life, and ability, and Hippocrates gained great fame. For more than 2,000 years this was what medicine was about in most of Europe. On other continents similar medical systems were developed. The medicine wheel of the Native Americans, the African Sangoma culture, the Samic shamans of Northern Europe, the healers of the Australian Aboriginals, the Ayurvedic doctors of India, the acupuncturists of China, and the herbal doctors of Tibet all seems to be fundamentally character medicine. All the theories and the medical understanding from these pre-modern cultures are now being integrated in what is called integrative or transcultural medicine. Many of the old medical systems are reappearing in modern time as alternative, complementary, and psychosocial medicine. What is happening today? Interestingly, two huge movements of the last century have put this old knowledge into use: psychoanalysis and psychodynamic therapy, most importantly SCTP, going though the mind on one hand, and bodywork, most importantly, and sexual therapy, especially the tantric tradition. Almost 20 years ago, we were conducting epidemiological research on quality of life, closely examining the connection between global quality of life and health in a series of huge surveys using large and extensive questionnaires, some of them with over 3,000 questions. We found quite surprisingly, from this huge database that quality of life, mental and physical health, and ability of social, sexual, and working ability seem to be caused primarily by the consciousness and philosophy of life of the person in question, and only to a small extent by objective factors, like being adopted, coming from a family with only one breadwinner, mother being mentally ill, or oneself being financially poor or poorly educated, which are obviously very much socially inherited. This scientific finding was not expected, and so counterintuitive for us that we were forced to investigate the subject, going to the roots of Western medicine, or the Hippocratic character of medicine. This meant that we had to look at transcultural and integrative medicine, the emerging science of alternative medicine, and to the very much forgotten traditions of psychosomatic, psychodynamic, and bodily-oriented therapies. Theoretically, epidemiologically, statistically, we have been looking at what seems to be the common denominator for all existential healing work in all cultures at all times. We have also been debating many difficult issues related to modern-day medical science. What we have learned from this long journey through the grand medical heritage from the different cultures on this planet is that we need to work on body, mind and spirit at the same time. Medicine men has always combined talking, touching, and praying, and that being human and truly kind is what really heals the other person. This is what Hippocrates called the art one, not the art of medicine, or the art of right living, but simply the art, the way of the human heart, cultivating existence into sheer compassionate behavior and joyful being, which has always been the ultimate goal of all the great healers in our history. The most paradoxical aspect of this is that while we like to think we are taking medicine forward, we are actually just taking medicine back to its roots. The most important thing is that research and development in this field is made in a dialectic process between qualitative and quantitative research. There are basically two ways of documenting an effect of a holistic medical intervention: the quantitative and the qualitative approach. Much effort has been given to developing valid methodology and measuring tools, but the art of documentation has become a complex and expensive task. In this communication, we will focus on the qualitative research method. Fortunately, the holistic approach makes it much simpler, because there are always three domains to investigate: health, quality of life, and ability. These three domains can be subdivided in as many detailed domains as one wishes, but often three are sufficient for most purposes.